This is a valve clearance video on a 998, so it's a Testastretta engine. Easiest visual way to tell a Testastretta is that on the left hand side of the cam there's a plug and the rocker cover goes around it. The heads are designed on these so they were still universal usage, horizontal or vertical, and these plates you can see with all the screws bolt on the side. There's O-rings underneath them to block the coolant passages, and the rocker pins, you see a couple of them there. Rocker pins are all through here. Bit of a pain in the ass, and certainly the 1098 head, which was the first unique horizontal or vertical 4-valve head, is a lot better design and functionally. On the 1098s there is no plug on this end, the rocker cover is just straight across because they didn't need to make them so you could put it on the horizontal in this instance. I'm going to do the valve clearances. I hopefully will not get in the way of the camera. We'll see how it goes. When you remove the rocker covers on these, on the vertical in particular, it'll leak oil from just in here behind this cam pulley, and it'll leak oil out this side down here. So you try and pop this side off first and catch that, and then catch that. And hopefully you won't have oil everywhere. There was a recall on these early on. They had a 37 or something etched into the cam on the vertical inlet, but none of the ones we had in our VIN range ever had it. So I've never actually seen what needed to be done. There's a fair bit of marking on the ramps of these cams. The horizontal exhaust was fairly bad too. So I don't know if maybe it's had a fairly thin oil in it at some point. I don't really know. It's a Japanese import, so it's the first time I have seen it. I've got no idea what's actually been done to it. The oil's clean, but we don't know what it is, so we're going to replace it. So checking the valve clearances. Start off with a 0.08 or 3 thou. You can always be hopeful, but the reality is that the first time I check most Testastrettas, they sort of end up doing most or all of the clearances. Up to 0.15 mil or 6 thou. That's 0.17 or 7 thou. Starting to almost get a bit draggy there. 0.2 mil or 8 thou. No, got a bit of drag on that one. And on that one. On that one. And on that one. It still goes through. 9 thou. Yep, finally one stopped. So we'll call it those 2 point. I think that one, this is probably a bit tighter than a 0.8. Sorry, a bit tighter than a 0.2 mil or 8 thou. Yeah. Okay, we might call that one a 0.18, and we'll call this one 0.2. The inlets, yep, that one we'll call 0.2. Sometimes you get a better access from the inside than the outside when you're getting close to what's actually happening. It sort of goes, but it's a bit draggy, so I'll call them a 0.2 for a start off. And the same for them. For anyone that's not a 0.2, is that closer. Put the 0.25 in, I'm sure it'll drag. Yep, so I'll call that 1.23 on 9th thou. So all the closers are 0.18, 0.2, 0.2, 0.23, and I'll pull them down to 0.05 and 0.07-ish. And I'll pull these openers down to about 0.13 and these to 0.15. The camera's attached to the bike, so when the bike moves, the camera moves, so hopefully you won't get seasick. These are fairly similar to do to a Testastretta, like a Evo, 1098, 1198, 848, or the later monsters or hypers and stuff. There's a few differences, I guess. The first difference is that the cam caps are not unique. Well, they're not completely different. So you just need to pay attention to one thing. When we pull this cam cap off, if these caps move, oil will run out of there too. Underneath the cam cap, you will see a groove here. That's the oil supply groove, which feeds oil into the cams here, and then feeds the oil through. The oil comes out all these small holes to lube everything. Only one cap has that groove. So the head side with the groove matches the cam cap with the groove. Okay, what happens is the seals stick in the cam cap. Okay. What I usually do now is get the brake fluid sucky bottle and suck the oil out. Off it goes. So there's less oil to make a mess that way. And these are the little circular seals that seal the end of the cams. Give it a quick wipe off. Give it a better wipe off before I put the cam caps back on. These holes tend to have assembly lube in them, and they will push it out when you're putting the cam caps on. Because the outers all have a dowel sleeve in them, if you put those screws in first, you can stop them pushing stuff out of the threads, whereas these ones will push something out of the threads. Start with the exhaust. These are the original tools that I have for moving rockers and holding them down. They work in 1098s, 1198s as well. I would use them in that video, but that's the original tool, Ducati tool for holding down the pins, which I will use. At this point, that's 749 exhaust, and that's 749 inlet or 998, 999 exhaust. Put them on there. lever it down. Just be careful when you're levering, you don't aggressively lever the rockers into the valve stem seal springs. I'll put a plastic tube in to block the oil drain backs, just so we don't lose any collets. Put this spring in to hold the rockers up, and usually it fits around the fuel tank mount on these just nicely. Opening your shims out. Okay, we'll spin the engine over to top dead centre and it will lift the valves up. And that way you don't need to worry about the valves falling into the cylinder. Now I like to get the collets out the way they were, which can be rather hard in one of these. And getting your fingers down in there. Put a magnet in and pick out one at a time. You can usually have it stick on the magnet the way it was, sort of like so. So I know that's at the top. And then later on I'll grind a little burr off the edge of it before we put them back in. Okay. Get the shim out on this side. Manipulate the position of this a bit to get a bit more push on this one. Sometimes the shims can get quite stuck on the collets. Need to tap them down. And then the collets can also get jammed onto the valves, although it's probably 11/98ths that were worse for that. These generally weren't too bad for collets getting stuck on valves. So I'll hold that one and pull that one. That should be the way it came out. And again, hold the edge of that, get a magnet on this end of it, and hopefully it stays like that. And shim out. So the right hand closer on the exhaust is a 294. Left hand closer, bottom of it. Left hand closer is a 305. So the right hand closer we have 0.2 gap. I want about 0.05, which means 0.15. So 294 and 15 is 309. I might not go quite that far because sometimes you tend to overshoot a bit. I did have a 306. No, maybe not enough. What was this one? 305 or so. Sometimes it's fairly easy to overshoot and you sort of end up going back and forward. 306, I might give it a whirl. Sometimes when you take down a gap that big, you tend to get a bit of inconsistency. The smaller the gap you're changing, usually the more consistent they are. It's the right hand. Left hand was 305 and 18, so I might take it down to about a 316 or so. Where are we? What are these ones? Sort of a 317. I'll whack it in and see what happens. Call that one 317. Both the openers were 0.2. I'll pull them down a little bit. See what they are. It's a 320. On the left hand, it's a 318. So I got 0.05 on them, so 323 and 325. It's 321. The 322, that'll do. It's in the left hand. Back in the bench. And about a 325 or 324. And it's 324. That'll do on the right hand. Okay, so the next thing to do now is file the little tangs off the collets. Maybe we'll turn it around and you can see me doing that from a distance. What I'm going to do now is take our collets, these little things, and we're going to file this burr off this edge so they sit on the valve better. This one sitting in the bike, the burr was on the clockwise end. That's how I look at it anyway. So I'll call that one clockwise. My screwdriver that way, so I remember where it was because I forget pretty quick. I'm going to file that little burr off. Okay. This one is also clockwise. Okay, so some people at this point might be tempted to just slip the collets over and put them back in, but the collets do settle. There is some wear on these that I can see with my normal glasses, not the extra strong ones. And if you adjust the clearances, then next time around, they'll be right again. Whereas if you flip the collets over or put new collets in it, it'll have exactly the same gap again. So people who turn collets over kind of drive me nuts. They tend to be quite consistent once they're in, particularly with the, if you filed the edges off the collets, they tend to be very consistent. I'll lift this valve a little, make it easy to get on. Sometimes I need to walk around the other side of the bike and get my finger in the right spot to get the collets on the valves. Can be a frustrating task at times, one that you probably can't see because it's always stuff in the way. And I put them on, then I spin the one that is on there to the other side so I can get in to the same place again to get the other one on. There we go. You can hear them snap. Sometimes they snap in nicely, sometimes they just don't. Get our tool. Okay. Now make sure the shim stays up. Push the rocker down and give it a snap. And that just settles the collets nicely. Okay, so now we go to the inlet side. Again, don't push the rockers too far down. This is the tool for the inlet valves, which is wider than the exhaust valves. Put that in there. Take our thing off. Usually get a short M6 screw and screw it in there. This is an O-ring that's probably a fuel pump plate O-ring from a 916 or something. It holds the rockers up. That's as high as these rockers go. You can't pull them out because you have to pull the plate off the side of the head, and you only do that if you really, really hate yourself. So I got opening shims out. Oops, I didn't put the opening shims back in the exhaust. I better get them off the bench before I confuse the shit out of myself. Okay, so that's the right hand. When you put an opening shim in, make sure it goes in and you can spin it. If you can't spin it, pull it out and get another one. Just need to make sure that they're sitting there nicely, they're resting on top of the valve without any obstruction from the closing shim. So put it in, spin it around, that's fine. Okay, so push the closing rockers down, that one fell down. Get our magnet, we'll hold that. Stupid fat fingers, hold that one in and take that collet out. Take that collet out, and the shim's going to come too. Yeah, that one's a bit stuck. My favourite tool for unsticking shims is my little 3/8 extension. Just tap, and it'll just push the shim down. Can't get in. Okay. Yeah, again, just try and get one end of one of the collets. That one flipped up, so it's that way. And the other one. The shim, which will probably need to be, there it goes. It's off. Okay. One thing you can do when you've got this apart is you can wiggle the valves around and see what sort of valve stem clearance you have, but it's possibly just going to depress you because these things often have quite a lot. And it's possibly something you don't really need to see, because you might just go into a frenzy about having to do valve guides in it. So the right hand is a 303. Left hand is a 304. From the inlets we had 0.23 and 0.2. I like about 0.07, 0.08, which means we need about 0.16 and 0.13. So if we had 0.16, that one has 320. And that one's about 316. So I might go one for a 315 on that side. And on this side, I'll try a 319 and see how we go. 315 on the back one. Okay, it's a 315, and that's going in the right hand. And we're after a 319. Always check the bottom of the shim to make sure it looks like it's flat, because sometimes they get grooves. They get a groove worn across them by the closing rocker. So I just always look at the bottom of them. And now, back to the head. Now, I need to go and file my collets. I'll save some battery while I do that. I forgot to measure the opener shims, so I've measured them. I'm actually going to swap the shims that were in the exhausts into the inlets. Hopefully they'll be about right. So I'll put the collets in. Again, you get your fingers in there any way you can. This one is actually always, for me, quite easy. The vertical I find much easier than the horizontal. The horizontal, you've got to get your fingers in. The horizontal inlet collets are just a nightmare. So I wouldn't show you them, and you probably wouldn't be able to see it anyway. These ones, if you need to walk to the other side of the bike, walk to the other side of the bike. There are no rules for how you do this. It's whatever works for you. Don't make it hard for yourself. Okay, they're in. Okay. Sometimes you need to give the collets a bit of just a push with a pick. So if we wind the engine back around a bit, the valves can go all the way down. Well, get the tool. It's easier. There we go. Again, if we just hold the shim up, keep your finger out of the way of the rocker, because I've never jammed my finger between a rocker and a shim, but I don't really want to try. Openers. Again, just make sure they spin. Okay. O-ring out. Lovely. Now I just get my scraper and just scrape the sealant that they put on these corners off. Do it on the left-hand side as well. Pull this out now. I'm going to also scrape the cam caps because they have corresponding sealant on them still. Just get all the oil off here. My first boss was a guy who was an engine builder with Repco Brabham and Ford in the GTHO days, and he absolutely hammered the no oil on mating surfaces line into me and the other guys who worked for him. So I'm always really preoccupied with getting any oil off the mating surfaces. Okay, cams. This is VA, vertical inlet. They will only go one way anyway. When you get it in, you'll work out that it's just not right. This one will be VS for vertical exhaust. If you do want to know what I'm doing, I'm taking the sealant that's on these areas here off. So let's get rid of that. Make sure you don't get anything on the cam journal surfaces themselves. Occasionally you'll drop something in there and then put it on, the cam will lock up. Had that happen a couple of times over the years. Okay, and this one, it's got the slot in it, is the left hand side, and there's two dowels there and no there, so other way of knowing it matches. So I put them on. I put the end screws in first, because that way we can't get oil into the in between the mating faces. Bit of a nip. And then I put the central screws in. Again, clean the mating faces of the cap down really nicely. So all the oil is out of the way. Bit hard around the dowels, but you just do what you can. And these things have lots of sharp machined edges too, so always be aware of catching yourself on a sharp machined edge, because they do cut pretty well. Okay. Screws in. These two. There we go, 25 Newton meters. Some people don't put the cams in like this when you're checking them. It's up to you. I like to feel for any binding between the rockers as you rotate the cam over. On the horizontal head I had an inlet opener about 0.03 and I had the inlet closer about 0.03 and the inlet opener about 0.1, and you could feel the cam binding as it went, as it would sort of go around. Because it was on the closing ramp and was nearly closed, it would really bind, and you can feel it on that one. There's some binding there somewhere. I'd say one of the closers is really tight, but we'll give them a measure. Start with a 1/2 thou or 0.5. Oh, that's nice. Oh, that's nice too. It's always nice when closers work the first time round. You don't have to pull them apart again. I'm guessing this one. Yeah, I think that one's really tight. And you can feel it in the cam. You can feel a sort of a grab just there, which I'd say is, and you can also feel it sort of dragging. So these are all 0.05. So we'll go 0.06. That's fun. So we'll call that 1.05 and that 1.06, I think. And we'll go 0.08. No. Okay. 0.05, 0.06. And that's good because we don't need to pull them out again. And this one, it's almost a 0.08. It's an easy 0.06, so we'll call it 0.07. And that's a big happy. Because the only problematic closer I've got is this one. So it's only one I need to pull out again. It's definitely pretty much 0, I think. Okay, so openers, we've got a 0.1 or 4th thou. It's okay, that's okay. They're okay. 5 thou. That's definitely tight. That's okay. So we'll call that one 0.1. And so the reason this cam's binding when you turn it over, when you try and rotate it, like you can feel it binding there, is because it's got probably 0 and 0.1, so it's got 0.1 combined clearance, whereas this one's probably got, well, it's got at least 0.2 combined clearance, and that's why it's happy. This is a 0.15. And there's no way that's going in, so that's good. We'll call that one 0.13. So it goes in okay from that. Sort of depends how they fit as to what you think is correct. Might be a 0.15. 0.15, 0.15. 7th thou or 0.17. It's not really going in. Not really on that one either. And from that side they sort of slide around okay. And call it a 17. Definitely not that one. So I might call that a 0.15. And we'll go to a 0.2 or 8th thou for these ones. It's just not having any of that, so I'm going to call them a 17, which is okay. I didn't pull them down much, but I'm here, so I sort of try and shoot for the targets that I want. And I'll loosen this one up a touch and tighten this one up a touch. I'm going to need to loosen this one off. So we'll pull it apart again. But we've only got one closer to adjust, which is nice. On the horizontal I had 3 closers to adjust after the first try. And it is pretty common to have it as a back and forward. It's pretty rare to get them right straight up. The fact that I do get some of them right straight up these days, I tend to count my shim measuring tool for its consistency in that regard. I got some EMS tools that I've had from Mike. I've had a couple now, one's sort of worn and no longer used, but I resorted all my shims recently with the new tool, and it tends to be much more consistent across the various shim manufacturers and that sort of thing. Okay. So I'm happy with all the exhaust, I think. And so now I'm just playing with the inlets. So we'll pull both openers out because I want to change both openers. Spin the engine over to push, just go backwards a bit, there we go. Push that up. Let's get my magnet. I was going to try and pull it out with my fingers, but it's probably not worth the aggro. Make it easy for myself. Just do it this way. Everything's coming out. So last time on the shim, it was a 3.04 and I put a 3.19 in, which should have been even a little bit short of the required gap, but now it's really tight. So the question becomes, do we try a different 3.19 or do we try a 3.17? You just sort of make a choice and see what happens. I did a recording last week on ST4S, and I think every shim went straight in and right except for one of the vertical inlet closers, which I was recording. I only recorded the vertical inlet closers, and I think I had about 4 goes of it before the battery went flat, and then about another 5 or 6 goes. In the end I put a shim in that was too tight and then rubbed the shim until it was right, because there'd be shims that were too tight and you'd go 0.02 and they'd be too loose, like massive difference. So it was really, really frustrating. This one's a 317. I just gave it a rub to make sure it was nice and flat. And it's an old style shim, which I use the old style shims in these engines. They don't need the ones like Testastretta do. And the collets on these ones, the wear is obvious enough for me to see. It's nice. Sort of place the shim in and maneuver it into the gap. Like so. Get my little pick. Just pop the shims in. So I pop the collets into the groove properly. Okay. Pull the tool out. Give it a snap. And now the openers. This side was a bit loose. It's a 3.20. So I might go 322. I'll call that a 322. That was the right hand one. Pop it in there, make sure it spins. And the left hand one, down here, was a bit tight. It was a 318. So I might pop the 320 in that side. It was in the other side. Oh, I'm sorry, no, it's 318, it was too tight. So I'll try 315. And my battery's going flat, so that's about the end for now.